Well, we're in the season of controversy in the Presbyterian Church. We are voting on the amendments to the Constitution and some other issues that have come before us as a denomination this year. At least now we only do this every 2 years. Remember just a few years ago in the Presbyterian Church when we voted on amendments to the Constitution every year because there was a General Assembly every year? At least we have slowed things down a little bit. Controversy, of course, is not something new in the Presbyterian Church or in the church as a whole. I was reading today just a little bit of the history of the church that I grew up in, First Presbyterian Church here in Peoria, Illinois. And it's interesting to look back into the early 1800s when this church started and to realize that there were controversies even from the beginning of this church. One of the earliest controversies that they had is that one of the first members of the church built one of the first buildings on property that that member owned. And then a pastor early in the church's history left, and the Board of Home Missions sent a new pastor here to the frontier in Peoria to serve that church. The man on whose property the church had been built didn't like that new pastor and wouldn't allow that new pastor to preach in the church. Apparently, he said, "I own this church and I will decide who preaches here." There was another controversy in the church several years later when they had built a bigger building and when they installed an organ in the church. The first Sunday that that organ was played in the church, apparently a man who had been born in Scotland stood up in the church, objected to the use of any instrumental music in worship, because you know there aren't any instruments used in the New Testament, and so even today some churches will not allow instruments to be used in their churches. And he stormed out of the church. He was so mad, he eventually moved back to Scotland, where apparently they knew how to do church more correctly. Controversy is nothing new. But what controversy has done throughout the history of the church is to distract us from what God is really calling us to do. You know that throughout Scripture we are reminded that what God really wants us to do is to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with God. Listen to this 58th chapter of the prophet Isaiah and remember what we are called to do. Shout out, God says to God's prophet. Do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their rebellion, to the house of Jacob their sins. Yet day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask of me, God says, righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God. Why do we fast, but you do not see? Why humble ourselves, but you do not notice? Look, you serve your own interest, God says, on your fast day, and oppress all your workers. Look, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and the Lord will say, here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall rise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. Surely there are breaches, gaps in the wall, differences among people that need to be repaired now. And some of those breaches, those gaps, occur between us, even within our own congregations when we disagree about things. But the real breach we are being called to repair is the breach between those of us who know that we are beloved children of God, that we have been saved from our sinfulness through Jesus Christ and had our lives changed because we have met him. The difference between us and the people who don't know that yet, who need to hear that from us, who need to see through the way we treat one another what it means to be a follower of God in Jesus Christ. And so we are in the season of controversy. But we shouldn't let the controversy distract us from what God is calling us to do, to feed and clothe and teach the gospel so that that breach can be repaired.